Hey there, members of the Night Crew, and folks who just love horror. Welcome to the Night Crew podcast, where shadows breathe and monsters listen. This is the podcast where we get cozy with the creepy, the frightening, and the just plain undead. I'm your host, Brad Ricks. Quick business before we get into it. Signing copies of all my books are available at bradricks.com. If you've been on the fence about grabbing one, consider this your sign. A creepy, possibly supernatural sign, but a sign nonetheless. Night Crew 3 Hunting Ground is on its way, July 3rd. I'm also almost done with edits on Dead Mountain. I have a lot of exciting stuff happening this year, so don't go anywhere. You can also find me on Facebook and TikTok at Brad Ricks Author. Say hi. Tell me what keeps you up at night. I am, professionally, very interested in that information. And if you enjoy the show, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, leave a rating, share it with someone who appreciates a good, dark story. It genuinely helps, the show more than you know. And I mean, come on, the Night Crew has always come through for you. All right, let's talk about hunger. Now, not the normal kind. I've got a house full of teenagers. I understand hunger. I'm not talking about that. Not the kind where you skip lunch and you get a little hangry and you start eyeing your coworkers' leftover pizza. No. I'm talking about the other kind. The kind that starts somewhere deep and cold. The kind that gets worse the more you feed it. The kind that used to walk out of the northern forests on legs too long for a human body and take people who are never coming back. Tonight, it's the Wendigo. Now, before we get into the monster itself, I want to spend a few minutes talking about where this legend actually originates. Because the Wendigo is not a Hollywood invention. It's not a campfire story someone made up to scare counselors, and not a creature that started in a video game. Even though it's been in approximately all of those things at this point. The Wendigo comes from the living oral traditions of the Algonquin speaking indigenous peoples of the northeastern North America. Primarily the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Innu, the Naskapi, the Potawatomi, among others. These are people who lived and continue to live across a vast stretch of territory. The boreal forest, the subarctic, the Great Lakes region. We're talking some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. Winters that can kill you in hours if you make one wrong move. Stretches of forest so dense and so dark that getting lost is genuinely a one-way trip. Long seasons of isolation where the nearest other human might be days away, where hunting could fail, where the food could just run out entirely. Now, I say all that not just to set the scene, though, I mean, it does set a pretty effective scene, but because you cannot understand the Wendigo without understanding the world it was born into. This is not a monster story for entertainment. This is a story about the worst thing a person could become, and the worst thing that desperation could do to a community. The Wendigo is a cautionary tale with teeth, literally. Different nations have different names and slightly different versions, and we've kind of seen that with vampires and werewolves. I mean, everybody kind of has their own take. So there's one that's Wendigo with an E. There's Wendigo with an I. There's Wetico. The spelling kind of varies depending on the language and the transcription. But the core concept is remarkably consistent across a wide geographic area, which kind of tells you something about how seriously this idea was taken and how real the fear behind it is. So, what is it? The Wendigo, at its most basic, is a spirit, or a creature, or a possessed human, kind of depending on the tradition. Either which way, it's associated with winter, cold, the northern wilderness, and cannibalism. That last word, it's the important one. In many Algonquin traditions, the Wendigo is what happens when a person crosses the line that should never be crossed: eating human flesh. Now, whether by choice or by that desperate necessity, the act, it opens a door. And what comes through that door isn't something that wants to go back. The physical descriptions across traditions share a consistent and deeply unpleasant set of features. The Wendigo is tall, unnaturally tall. We're talking well above human height. Some accounts suggesting 15 feet or more. It is skeletal. I'm not talking like thin or like underweight. I mean like skeletal, as in you can see every bone, as in the skin is kind of pulled tight over a frame that looks like it's been starving for centuries. And yet it is always hungry. That's really the cruel, elegant horror at the heart of the Wendigo. It can never be satisfied. The more it eats, the larger it grows. The larger it grows, the more it eats. You see the pattern? It is a creature of infinite appetite, trapped in a cycle it cannot escape. The hunger isn't a side effect. The hunger is the point. The hunger is what it is. Its heart, in many traditions, is made of ice. Literal ice. Which explains a lot about its disposition, honestly. Other consistent features. The smell. The Wendigo reeks of decay and death, which gives you at least a little warning before it arrives, though not necessarily enough time to do anything useful about it. It moves fast, faster than something that skinny has any right to move. It can travel through the forest silently when it wants to, or it can announce itself with a shriek that carries for miles through the winter woods. Some traditions describe it as having lips that have been chewed off, eaten by the creature itself in its endless, unsatisfiable hunger. Its eyes are pushed deep into the sockets. Its complexion is grayish or corpse pale, or in some descriptions, a kind of sallow yellow. It is, in short, not something you want to run into on a hunting trip. Which, to be fair, most things that you could run into on a winter hunting trip in the subarctic already qualify for that description. The Wendigo just really commits to the bit. There's also a transformation element in many of the traditions. The idea that a Wendigo was once a person, a hunter, a community member, someone known. The transformation doesn't make it sympathetic exactly, but it does kind of make it worse in a different way. Because now you're looking at something wearing the shape of someone you knew with nothing of that person left inside it. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit. And this is kind of where things really get interesting. And by interesting, I mean genuinely disturbing in a way that really goes beyond folklore. Wendigo psychosis is a documented phenomenon, described in historical records, studied by anthropologists and psychiatrists, and debated in academic literature. It refers to a condition in which a person, typically in the context of a community that holds Wendigo beliefs, but it's when that person becomes convinced that they are transforming into a Wendigo, that they are craving human flesh, that the change is happening and cannot be stopped. Accounts of Wendigo psychosis go back centuries in the historical record, documented by European missionaries and fur traders and colonial officials who had no particular reason to make this stuff up. And in many cases, they were clearly unsettled by what they were witnessing and writing down. Now, the most well-documented case involves a Cree man named Swift Runner. Now, this is back in 1878 in northern Alberta. Swift Runner had lost his family, his wife, and 5 children to starvation during the winter. He survived. Now, when he emerged from the wilderness in the spring, I know what you're already thinking. Let me get there. When he emerged from the wilderness in the spring, he was taken into custody after community members became alarmed by his behavior. Yep, now we're getting to it. Because under questioning, he confessed to killing and eating his family. He was tried, convicted, and executed. But the part that sits in the historical record like a cold stone is this. Swift Runner said he had been compelled, that something had come over him, that the hunger hadn't been his own. Now, I am not going to tell you what to do with that. It wouldn't be a good night crew host if I did. But now historians and psychiatrists have argued about it ever since. Was it a genuine psychotic break brought on by extreme starvation and guilt and grief? Was it a culturally shaped framework for explaining a horror that defied explanation? Or was it something else entirely? What I will tell you is that Swift Runner's case is not isolated. There are multiple documented accounts across the historical record of people in Algonquin communities exhibiting what gets described as Wendigo psychosis, the craving, the fear of their own transformation, the plea to be stopped before they became something that couldn't be stopped. Which brings us to one of the more haunting aspects of how these communities actually dealt with the Wendigo threat. Because sometimes, and not always, but sometimes, the response wasn't to wait for the transformation to complete. In some documented cases, community members would identify someone showing early signs of Wendigo psychosis and make the decision to intervene before things progressed further. A shaman might be consulted, rituals might be performed, and if those failed, or if the situation was already too far gone, the community might take more permanent action. There are accounts of people requesting this for themselves, asking to be stopped, understanding that, what they were becoming They were understanding what they were becoming and not wanting to become it. Now, that detail right there, I mean, it's something that really separates the Wendigo legend from kind of your average monster story. Most monsters, they don't ask for help. Now, let's get into the practical folklore. How does a Wendigo behave? What draws it? What are the rules? I mean, if you want to be a good member of the night crew, you got to know these things. The Wendigo is a creature of winter and wilderness. It doesn't show up in summer. It doesn't haunt towns or cities. It lives in the deep forest, the frozen north, the places where you are already very far from help. If you're in a position to encounter a Wendigo, you've already made several decisions that I would gently categorize as suboptimal. It is drawn to isolation, a lone hunter separated from his party, a traveler who has wandered off the trail, someone who has pushed too far into territory where no one knows they've gone. The Wendigo doesn't typically walk into a camp of 20 well-armed people. It finds the edges. It finds the ones who are already vulnerable. It's also drawn to the desperate. In some traditions, a person who is starving, I mean like truly starving, like at the edge of survival kind of starving, it becomes more susceptible to Wendigo possession. The hunger opens something. It is a crack in the wall between what a person is and what a Wendigo is. And the Wendigo knows how to find those cracks. The Wendigo can mimic voices. Now, this is a detail that shows up consistently and that I find particularly unpleasant. It can call out in the voice of someone you know, a family member, a friend, someone in your party. And it does that to lure you away from safety. It can sound like crying. It can sound like someone calling for help. I probably don't need to say this to you guys because if you've been listening to the podcast, you got a little bit of knowledge when it comes to scary stuff, but don't follow a sound into the forest at night. I feel like this advice holds up regardless of whether you believe in the Wendigo or any creatures for that matter. Don't go following a sound into the winter forest at night or just enter any forest at night. Let's just go with that. Sweet Jesus. All right. There are also accounts of the Wendigo being able to possess or influence people at a distance, sending the hunger ahead of itself, so to speak, before it physically arrives. This is where some of the psychosis cases get particularly complicated to parse because the framework of the tradition doesn't cleanly separate possession from psychological breakdown. They may be describing the same thing from different angles. The Wendigo is also fast, inhumanly fast, for something that looks like it should barely be able to stand up. Some accounts describe it as able to run down a person on horseback. Others describe it crossing vast distances in really what feels like no time at all. There one moment, somewhere else the next. The forest between those 2 points, apparently just optional. It also doesn't get tired. It doesn't get cold. It is, in every practical sense, designed for the environment that kills you and simply doesn't apply to it. You see, you are fighting the winter itself, basically. Good luck. All right, let's say hypothetically that you find yourself in the northern boreal forest in the middle of January. Something 15 feet tall and skeletal is moving between the trees. It smells like a graveyard, and it has already demonstrated that it can run faster than you. Totally hypothetical, but let's be prepared. That's what the Night Crew is about. First thing to know is that conventional weapons are largely useless. You can wound a Wendigo, you can slow it down, but stabbing or shooting something that is already essentially a skeleton animated by some kind of a supernatural hunger, it is not going to get you all that very far. The Wendigo isn't here for your sword. It's not really impressed by your firearms. It's been doing this since before your great great grandmother was born, and it is, frankly, in better shape than you are. You see, the key is that heart that we talked about, the heart of ice. In many traditions, the only way to truly kill a Wendigo is to destroy that frozen heart. And the only thing that destroys ice is fire. You see, you have to burn the Wendigo. And I'm not talking like singe it, not like let's set part of it on fire. Burn it completely, reduce it to ash, and then scatter those ashes so that nothing can reconstitute. If any part of the body remains intact, there is a risk of regeneration. The Wendigo is not interested in staying dead if it has any say in the matter. Some traditions specify that the fire itself also needs to be significant. Not a campfire, not a torch, a proper, sustained, consuming fire. The kind that leaves nothing, which does kind of present a logistical challenge if you are currently being chased through a frozen forest. But, folklore kind of rarely accounts for your scheduling constraints. There's also the matter of who does the killing. In many traditions, an ordinary person cannot reliably kill a Wendigo. You need a shaman, someone with the spiritual knowledge and authority to engage the creature on its own terms. The Wendigo, it isn't just a physical threat, it is also a spiritual one. Fighting it with purely physical means is like bringing a butter knife to a theological argument. Technically, it's there. It's not really going to help, though. The shaman's role wasn't just to kill, but to contain, to perform the proper rituals before and after, to ensure the spirit was properly dispersed and couldn't reconstitute or transfer to someone else. This was serious, specialized work. And it was also, by all accounts, extremely freaking dangerous work. Shamans who confronted Wendigos, they didn't always come back in good shape, and some didn't come back at all. There are also accounts of communities using silver, but this is kind of largely a cross-contamination from European werewolf traditions that kind of filtering in later. They kind of filtered in more colonial influenced accounts. The original Algonquin traditions, they don't lead with silver. They lead with fire, with spiritual authority, and with the recognition that you are dealing with something that used to be a person and carries the grief of that transformation within it. One additional detail that I find genuinely chilling: some accounts suggest that to fight a Wendigo, you have to be willing to look at it directly, to see it for what it is, not flinch, not run. Because the Wendigo feeds on fear the same way it feeds on everything else. Fear is an invitation. Fear is a door left open. So, in summary, a fire, a shaman, no fear, and Ideally, a very good reason for being in the subarctic in January in the first place. So that's how you kill a Wendigo. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the Wendigo got into Western storytelling. So it really crossed into our popular consciousness largely through one door. It was a British writer named Algernon Blackwood, and his 1907 short story, simply titled, you guessed it, The Wendigo. Blackwood had actually spent time in Canada and was writing from at least some exposure to the landscape and the lore, which gives the story a texture that a lot of early weird fiction lacks. His Wendigo isn't a monster you see clearly. It is something at the edge of perception, something vast and cold and moving through the trees faster than anything should move. One of the characters in the story hears it call his name and answers. Now, the story influenced H.P. Lovecraft, which then influenced essentially everyone who came after in the horror tradition. So you can really kind of draw a fairly direct line from the Ojibwa oral tradition to Blackwood to Lovecraft to the creature feature shelf at your local library. It's a longer line than most people realize, and it starts somewhere much older and more serious than the end product usually suggests. Now, from there, the Wendigo became a fixture of North American horror. It even shows up in Stephen King, most directly in like Pet Sematary, where the Micmac burial ground carries a Wendigo adjacent corruption that possesses the land itself. If you're only familiar with Pet Sematary from the movies, they don't really talk about it. Read the book. King is good enough to acknowledge what he's drawing from, and the dread in that book has the specific flavor of something that knows the land better than you do. Again, read the books, don't just watch the movie. In more recent pop culture, the Wendigo has become something of a go-to creature for games and really visual media. Until Dawn, Supernatural, various tabletop RPG monsters, video games. The Wendigo, in which it kind of feels like every horror game released since 2010. Most of these take the physical description and kind of ditch the deeper cultural context, which is really a shame because the cultural context is actually really the most terrifying part. A monster that is a monster because of what it ate is scarier than a monster that is just simply a monster. I mean, one of those has a story, and one of those, it was someone. Now, the Wendigo, born from one of the harshest environments on Earth, shaped by real fear, real desperation, and a community's understanding that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. What gets me about this one, and I've been sitting on it, sitting with this for a while, is that the Wendigo isn't evil in the way most monsters are evil. It's not malevolent. Oh, that was an easy word for me to say, wasn't it? It's not malevolent. It's not cruel for the sake of cruelty. It's just hungry. And it will always be hungry. And that endless, unsatisfiable hunger is somehow more disturbing, really to me, than anything that simply wants to just cause harm. At least malevolence has limits. Hunger, it doesn't. If you want to go deeper on this one, and I recommend you do, look up the anthropological work on Wendigo psychosis. Lou Morano's 1985 paper is a good starting point if you want the academic angle. And of course, track down Algernon Blackwood's original 1907 story. It's public domain at this point. It's short, and it is genuinely unsettling in the best possible way. Perfect for a winter evening. Just maybe don't read it alone in the woods. that's it for the Night Crew podcast and our chilling look at the Wendigo. See what I did there? Chilling. If you had a good time, make sure to follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a rating. Hopefully, 5 stars. If you want updates on my writing, you can follow me on Facebook or TikTok at Bradrick's Author. You can find copies of my novels wherever you like to buy books. But if you hop over to my website, bradricks.com, you can purchase signed copies of any of my novels and get yourself a Night Crew podcast t-shirt. I'm Brad Ricks, reminding you to stay out of graveyards after dark, question people who don't show up in mirrors, and try not to get lost in a forest in the dead of winter. At some point, you're just kind of asking for it. Until next time, keep your curtains drawn, your sense of humor sharp, and your blood inside your body. Thanks for listening.